You said no. That's all. 2 letters, 1 syllable, a complete sentence with no footnotes, no apology attached, no 3-paragraph explanation of why you can't make it, why it doesn't work for you, why you hope they understand, why you're so sorry, but you just said no, and watch what happens to the room. The air changes. Something tightens in the face of the person who asked. They weren't expecting it. Nobody expects it from you, because you have trained everyone in your life through years of consistent compliance to expect yes. Yes is your default setting. Yes is the product you manufacture and distribute for free to anyone who shows up with a request and even a marginal claim on your time. You have been so reliably yes that your no registers not as a boundary, but as a malfunction. Something must be wrong. You must be upset. You must be going through something. Because the you they know, the you they need, the you that makes the whole social arrangement function, does not say no. They will ask again, differently phrased, with slightly more pressure behind it, disguised as concern. And when you hold the no, when you don't apologize your way back to yes, the thing that happens next is the thing nobody warned you about. They get angry, not loudly most of the time. The anger is architectural, built into the sudden cooling of the interaction, the slight withdrawal of warmth, the passive commentary that floats through the group chat 2 days later. You've become difficult. You've changed. You're not the same. And all of these statements are delivered with the implication that the old you, the yes machine, the people pleaser, the man who swallowed his own preferences daily and smiled while doing it, was the better version, the real version, the version they'd like back. Friedrich Nietzsche would not be surprised by any of this. He saw the whole mechanism 2 centuries before social media gave it new infrastructure. Quick experiment. Think of the last time you said no to something you did not want to do, and said it without the apology, without the explanation, without the, "I'm so sorry, I just can't make it work this time." Just, no. How did that land? What did it cost you socially? If the answer is nothing, either you have built something extraordinary, or you have not yet tried. If the answer is something, if the no produced the frown, the follow-up text, the slight cooling in the room, then you have just identified the price of your own preference in that environment. Comment what that price was. I am not asking for the city. I am asking for the cost. Nietzsche had a word for what you were trained to be. He called it the product of slave morality. And before you recoil from the framing, before the word slave trips your defenses, understand what he actually meant, because the observation is precise enough to be uncomfortable. He was not talking about weakness as a character flaw. He was talking about weakness that has been philosophically reclassified as virtue. The process by which the people who lacked the power to be dangerous decided that not being dangerous was the highest possible human achievement. They took their limitation and named it enlightenment. They took their inability to enforce a boundary and called it kindness. They took their fear of conflict and built a religion out of it, and then they turned to the men who still had teeth and claws and said, "Look how much more evolved we are." This is the engine behind what you were taught about being nice. Nice is not neutral. Nice is not simply the absence of cruelty. Nice, as it is deployed in the social contract most men were handed at birth, is a system of behavioral control dressed up as moral virtue. The nice man does not create friction. He does not demand renegotiation. He does not disrupt the arrangement that benefits everyone except himself. He absorbs. He accommodates. He performs contentment. He is, from the perspective of the system that requires his compliance, the perfect citizen. Productive, pleasant, and too conflict-averse to ever ask why the arrangement is structured the way it is. They will never tell you this directly. Nobody sits you down at 12 years old and says, "We need you compliant, so we're going to call compliance goodness." But the message arrives through 1,000 smaller transmissions. The boy who defers is praised. The boy who pushes back is corrected. The man who keeps the peace is promoted. The man who names the discomfort is labeled difficult. Over 20, 30, 40 years of consistent conditioning, a pattern solidifies. The way to be safe is to be agreeable. The way to belong is to shrink. The way to be loved is to never, under any circumstances, be inconvenient. And so you became convenient. Here is what the convenient man accumulates, below the level of conscious accounting. Every time you said yes when you meant no, something registered it. Not dramatically. The psyche doesn't file complaints in real time, but it keeps a ledger. And the ledger doesn't track the individual moments, it tracks the pattern. The pattern of your preferences being consistently subordinated to someone else's comfort. The pattern of your discomfort being consistently performed away rather than expressed. The pattern of your authentic response being filtered through the question, "Will this cost me belonging?" before it is allowed to exist in the world. That ledger accumulates interest. Silently for years at a rate nobody warned you about. It surfaces as the irritability that arrives from nowhere. The disproportionate anger at something minor that is actually the anger at 10,000 major things compressed into a single triggering incident. The depression that presents as numbness. The specific flatness of a man who has spent so long not feeling what he actually feels that the emotional register has gone partially offline. The quiet contempt for people you're supposed to love, which isn't actually contempt for them. It's contempt for the version of yourself you become when you're with them. The version that still says yes. The version that still performs. The version you hate most. Nietzsche called this specific psychological accumulation ressentiment, a French word he used deliberately for its connotation, not simple anger, but the festering, inward-turning resentment of a man who cannot express his power outward, so it curdles and turns against him. The nice man is not peaceful. He is a container of suppressed force operating under enormous pressure, performing serenity while the interior corrodes. The system that benefits from your compliance is not unaware of this. It is indifferent to it. Your psychological corrosion is not its problem. Your smile is. Nietzsche's distinction between master morality and slave morality is not a justification for cruelty. Get that out of your head immediately, because it is the misreading that the comfortable use to dismiss the idea without engaging it. The master, in Nietzsche's framework, is not the man who dominates others. He is the man who defines his own values from the inside, rather than accepting the values handed down by the people who needed him manageable. His morality begins with the question, what is good? And his answer comes from his own nature, his own power, his own vision of what life at its fullest actually looks like. He does not require external validation of his worth. He does not perform goodness for an audience. He simply is what he is without apology, and without the theatrical humility of the man who has been taught that self-assertion is sin. The slave begins from the opposite question, not what is good, but what is evil? And evil, in the slave's taxonomy, is always the master, the strong man, the man who doesn't ask permission, the man whose presence is threatening because he operates outside the parameters of the compliance agreement. The slave builds his identity entirely in opposition. I am good because I am not him. I am virtuous because I do not do what he does. My restraint is my superiority. This is the psychological architecture of the social pressure applied to you when you stopped being nice. When you said no, you briefly became the master in that interaction. You asserted your own priority. You refused the subordination the arrangement required. And the people operating from slave morality, not out of malice but out of deep psychological necessity, experienced that as a threat, not to their comfort, precisely, to their self-concept. Because if you are allowed to assert your priority without consequence, if your no is respected and the arrangement accommodates it, then the entire premise of the compliance agreement unravels. Then the sacrifice they made, all the yeses they said while meaning no, all the preferences they subordinated, all the seething ressentiment they've been carefully managing, was for nothing, was optional, was a choice they made that they could have refused. That is intolerable. So you must be punished back into compliance, called selfish, called difficult, reminded of what you owe. The anger is not really about your no. It is about what your no implies about their yes. The practical question is not philosophical. It is this. What do you actually do with the information? You do not become cruel. Cruelty is not strength. It is the performance of strength by a man who isn't sure he has it. And Nietzsche was clear about that distinction. The sovereign man does not need to wound to establish his position. He does not require the submission of others as proof of his own adequacy. His power is self-referential. It generates from inside and radiates outward as a quality of presence, not as a behavioral campaign of dominance. What you do is stop performing emotions you are not having. Stop smiling when nothing is funny. The social smile, the reflexive, defensive upward curve that signals I am not a threat, I am not a problem, please continue to approve of me, is the most continuous and exhausting performance in the nice man's repertoire. It costs something every time. Not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently, in the way that a slow leak costs something. The loss accumulates over time into a structural deficit. Stop explaining your no. The explanation is the tell. The explanation says, I don't trust my no to stand on its own, so I am building a legal case for it, and I am implicitly asking for your verdict on whether my reason is sufficient. A man who has internalized his own authority does not submit his decisions for peer review. No is a complete sentence. It requires no supporting documentation. Stop maintaining relationships that only function when you are in service mode. The test is simple and uncomfortable. What happens to this relationship when you are unavailable? When you have nothing to give, nothing to provide, no yes in stock? If the answer is that the relationship goes cold, goes absent, goes passive-aggressive, then you were not in a relationship. You were in a transaction and the terms were always asymmetric, and you were always on the wrong side of them. This is the part where the discomfort concentrates, so pay attention. When you stop being nice in the way Nietzsche describes, when you begin operating from your own values rather than the externally installed compliance code, the people around you will not celebrate it. They will not say, finally, the real you. They will experience it as loss, as aggression in some cases, as a betrayal of an implicit contract they believed was permanent. Some will leave, not loudly usually. The same quiet withdrawal you felt from people you've outgrown. You will now be on the other side of it. You will be the one being outgrown, in a sense, by people who needed you smaller, and there will be a period where this feels like failure, like something went wrong, like the nice man was right, and the authentic man is just the lonely man wearing a philosophical costume. Push through it. The men who stay, the ones who don't require your performance, who knew the mask was a mask and were waiting, with varying degrees of patience for you to put it down, these men are worth more than the entire former audience, and they will find you. Not because the universe is running a reward program for authenticity, because authentic men can recognize each other across a room, across a conversation, across the specific absence of performance that reads as a kind of signal. This one is real. That is not a metaphor. It is a behavioral reality. The man who has stopped performing emits a quality, a stillness, a directness, an absence of the continuous micromanagement of other people's perceptions, that other men who have done the same work recognize immediately. The shared understanding of what it costs to get here produces a different quality of connection than anything available in the nice man's crowded, applauding, fundamentally hollow social theater. Nietzsche's Übermensch, the overman, the self-overcoming man, is not a figure of domination. He is a figure of self-authorship, the man who creates his own values rather than inheriting them, who measures his actions against his own standard, rather than the standard assembled by people who needed him controllable, who experiences the full weight of his own existence without the anesthetic of constant social approval. Let's be specific about the mechanics because the abstract is where men hide from the practical. The moment you begin saying no without justification, the social ecosystem around you initiates what could be called a re-domestication sequence. It is not orchestrated. It does not require conspiracy or intent. It emerges naturally from the collective self-interest of a group that benefited from your compliance and now perceives a threat to that benefit. The sequence follows a predictable pattern, and knowing the pattern in advance is the only protection against being caught off guard by it. First comes the probe. The original request gets reissued, slightly reformatted, to test whether the no was firm or situational. Are you sure? What if we just... These are not genuine questions. They are pressure tests. The compliant man, conditioned to find conflict more uncomfortable than capitulation, usually breaks here. He finds a version of yes that lets him present the reversal as a reasonable reconsideration rather than a defeat. The no never actually got enforced. The boundary never actually got established. The sequence resets with the lesson confirmed. Pressure works. If the no survives the probe, the second phase arrives. Reframing. Your no becomes a personality disorder. You are going through something. You are being selfish. You are not yourself. This phase is delivered with the syntax of concern but the function of accusation. It pathologizes your boundary while simultaneously providing the path back to approval. Just agree, just comply, just stop being difficult and everything returns to normal. Normal being the arrangement where your preferences are consistently last. If you hold through the reframing, the third phase is the coldest. Withdrawal, not dramatic confrontation. The nice man's social environment rarely produces dramatic confrontation, because confrontation requires the kind of directness that the compliance culture has bred out of everyone in the room. Just a measurable reduction in warmth, the slightly shorter responses, the invitation not extended, the subtle repositioning of the social architecture that quietly demotes your standing. You said no and nothing catastrophic happened, but the room is colder now, and the cold is designed to teach you that belonging has a price, and you have not been paying it. Most men return to compliance somewhere in these three phases. Not because they are weak. Weakness is not the diagnosis. Because belonging is a biological need, and the threat of its withdrawal activates something ancient and powerful that operates well below the level of philosophical reasoning. The system exploits a real vulnerability. The compliance is purchased with something that feels in the moment like genuine cost. The man who does not return to compliance, who holds through all three phases and comes out the other side with his no intact, discovers something that cannot be fully transmitted secondhand. The cold room that was supposed to punish him becomes, over time, simply the room. The people who withdrew their warmth reveal by the withdrawal that the warmth was conditional, was instrumental, was not actually warmth, but the temperature of an arrangement. And that revelation, though uncomfortable in the moment, is a form of clarity that the nice man never gets to access. He never sees the mechanism because he never tests it. He maintains a comforting ambiguity. Maybe they do care. Maybe it is genuine. Maybe if I just kept being good, the arrangement would have been real. It is not real. The coldness proves it. And the proof, however painful, is a gift. One more layer that most people skip over when they engage Nietzsche, because it requires the most personal honesty. The man who was trained into niceness is not just a victim of the system. He is, at some level, a collaborator in his own management. Not consciously, not voluntarily, but the compliance was never entirely externally imposed. It was internally adopted, at the level of identity, in a way that makes recovery more complicated than simply deciding to say no more often. The nice man has built a self-concept that requires the approval of others as structural support. His sense of his own goodness, his own worth, his own fundamental adequacy as a human being, is woven through with the evidence of how others respond to him. When they are pleased, he is good. When they are displeased, the structural support wavers. The no, for him, is not just a social risk. It is an existential one. He is not just risking the relationship. He is risking the architecture of self that the relationship has been holding up. This is why Nietzsche's prescription is not simply behavioral modification. It is not a course on assertiveness. It is a complete reconstruction of the source of self-valuation, from external to internal, from what they think of me to what I actually am when no one's reaction is available as a reference point. The man who does this work becomes genuinely independent in the only sense that matters. He is no longer dependent on others' approval to know that he is real. That reconstruction takes longer than a video. It takes longer than a philosophy. It takes exposure. Repeated uncomfortable exposure to the experience of holding your own position under social pressure, surviving the pressure, and discovering that survival on the other side of disapproval is not just possible but formative. Every time you hold the no, the internal architecture gets stronger. Every time the room goes cold and you do not collapse, something fundamental in your self-concept recalibrates. Over time, the external thermometer loses its authority. The cold room is just a cold room. The withdrawal is just information. And the man who used to need constant warmth to feel real finds that he generates his own. That is the Nietzschean project. Not to become hard, to become self-sufficient. Not to become indifferent, to become genuinely structurally free from the dependency that made the performance of niceness necessary in the first place. There's a specific moment that men who've been through this process describe in strikingly similar terms. The moment when someone pushes, tries the probe, the reframing, the withdrawal, and instead of the familiar internal alarm activating, instead of the anxious scanning of the social landscape and the calculation of how much compliance will restore the temperature, there is just quiet. Not the quiet of suppression, not the quiet of a man holding himself together with enormous effort. The other kind, the quiet of a man who is simply not interested in the negotiation, who has evaluated the dynamic and found it not worth the energy of engagement, who has grown so accustomed to his own company and his own assessment of his own worth that the withdrawal of someone else's approval registers as mild weather, noted, not particularly relevant. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote about the great health, not physical health, the vitality of a man who has ceased to be at war with his own nature, who no longer spends the majority of his psychological resources on the management of other people's perception of him. All of that energy, previously allocated to the performance of niceness, becomes available for something else. Creation, work, the kind of focused, undistracted engagement with what actually matters that is simply not available to the man whose attention is perpetually fractured by the social monitoring that compliance requires. The nice man is exhausted in a specific way that he can never fully explain. The exhaustion of constant performance has no obvious source because the performance has become so habitual that it no longer feels like effort. It just feels like the baseline state, the slight tension that is always present, the permanent low-grade vigilance that tracks every room's temperature and adjusts the output accordingly. He has forgotten what it feels like to not be tracking it. When the tracking stops, when the authentic man emerges and the performance goes offline, the exhaustion lifts in a way that takes him by surprise. He was not aware of how much he was carrying until he puts it down. This is the practical dividend of the Nietzschean transformation. Not just psychological freedom, actual energy, recovered from the maintenance of a performance that served everyone except him. Use it for something real. The last thing worth saying, the thing that separates the man who intellectually understands this from the man who actually lives it, is about the difference between performing strength and having it. The newly awakened man, freshly released from the compliance contract, sometimes overcorrects. He says no to everything. He performs indifference. He treats every social expectation as a trap to be resisted and every expression of warmth as a demand to be scrutinized. He has learned the vocabulary of the sovereign man but is still running on the energy of the compliant man, still reactive, still calibrating his behavior against an external standard, still performing, just a different performance, defiance instead of niceness. But the structure underneath is identical. His behavior is still being determined by his relationship to others' expectations, just in the opposite direction. Nietzsche was precise about this failure mode. The man who defines himself purely by his refusal of slave morality is still enslaved to it. He is still letting the slave's categories run his internal life. True sovereignty is not the performance of not caring. It is genuine indifference in the technical sense, the state in which the external validation system has simply lost its grip, not because you are fighting it, but because you have grown past the place where it had purchase. The authentic man is warm when he feels warmth. He is cold when he doesn't. He helps when helping serves something real in him, not as a social maintenance protocol. He expresses care because he has it, not because it manages the room. The difference between this and niceness is invisible from the outside in any single moment. It is only visible in the pattern, in the fact that his warmth never requires his self-betrayal as the price of admission. That man is genuinely good, not because he was trained into it, not because he is afraid of the consequences of being otherwise, because he chose it, from a position of actual freedom, as an expression of who he actually is. That is the distinction Nietzsche was pointing at the whole time. Not be cruel, not dominate, just be real. Be the thing that you actually are, without the filter, without the performance, without the tax that the compliant society charges for the right to exist at your actual size. Pay the social price. Own the coldness. Hold the no. Then see what's on the other side of it. The man who creates his own values carries the full weight of that creation. There is no authority to appeal to, no crowd to validate the choice, no external tribunal to confirm that he got it right. He gets it right by his own assessment, or he revises, or he fails entirely. And all of that is his, completely and without recourse. That is what they were protecting you from when they trained you into niceness, not cruelty, not isolation. The weight of your own freedom. Because a man who is genuinely free, who has genuinely stopped outsourcing his values to the social consensus, is carrying something enormous. And the nice man, the compliant man, the man who gives his yes so freely that he has no selfhood left to defend, never has to carry it. He is light, in a sense, unburdened. But what he has traded for that lightness is the entire substance of his own life. The price of niceness is the self, paid in daily installments, for decades, without a receipt. The price of niceness is the self, paid in daily installments, for decades, without a receipt. The man who is reading this sentence and feeling the specific discomfort of recognition, who has sensed, beneath the performance, the cost, that man is closer to the exit than he knows. The exit is not a dramatic departure. It is the refusal, in the next moment where the reflex arrives, to produce the performance on command. One refusal, then another. The self builds from the accumulation. Subscribe. The next video is for the man who has started to sense that staying quiet is the most dangerous thing he can do. In the best possible sense. The psychology of strategic silence. It changes the way every room reads you.